This summer event is so big that there's room for more than just one Jeanne. Hello everyone, Sobroni of G&A Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for the cheeky chutney that launched 1,000 dojins, Jeanne Alter, Berserker. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. So with that said, let's take a look at Jalter's stats. Jeanne Alter has a max HP of 9,922 and a max attack of 10,298, which becomes 11,327 due to her Berserker class damage modifier. Among the 4-star Berserkers, Jalter has the lowest HP stats, while her attack ranks fairly above average for the class. Overall, Jalter has a very high attack stat for a 4-star servant, but her HP is actually the lowest among all 4 stars. Her stat spread is the typical glass cannon that most Berserkers share, however her HP is exceptionally low even when compared to the other Berserkers. Taking a look at her skills, her first skill is Schwarzwald Folk, rank B. It applies evade for 1 hit every turn for 3 turns, and also increases her NP gain for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, depending on level. Her second skill is Witch of the Fallen, rank A+. It increases her attack for 3 turns, between 10 and 20%, depending on level, and it also applies burn to all of her attack for 3 turns, inflicting 500 points of damage to the enemy. And finally, her last skill is Moa Atudu, rank EX. It increases her Buster card effectiveness for 1 turn, between 10 and 20%, depending on level. It also charges her NP gauge by 20%, but it costs 1,000 HP as a demerit to activate. As for her passives, Jeanne Alter only has one, which is Madness Enhancement EX. It increases her Buster card effectiveness by 12%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Jalter has a pure Buster deck with Quick Arts, Buster, 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 and a Buster Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Dragon of the Darkness Flame. It deals significant damage to a single enemy with between a 600 and 1000% damage modifier, depending on level, and it also inflicts burn for 3 turns, dealing between 3,000 and 5,000 damage per turn, depending on overcharge. Taking a closer look at her cards, we see that her quick card hits 4 times, her arts hits 4 times, her buster hits 3 times, and her extra attack hits 5 times. She has an NP gain rate of 0.52% and a star rate of 5%. She does have some poor NP gain due to the buster card deck and low NP gain rate, but decent star generating due to her high hit counts. As a welfare servant, Jeanne Alter's Ascension material requirements are very simple and easy to obtain. She just needs 4 black feather pens, all of which can be obtained through completing quests in the summer event itself. Her skills are a different story though. For each skill, Jeanne will require 12 forbidden pages, 12 seashells, 20 magatamas, and 5 gallstones. Forbidden pages can be farmed at the Shinjuku 2 Chome in Shinjuku with a 30% drop rate. Seashells have a 40% drop rate at the Observatory in Babylonia. Magatamas are best farmed at the Castle Town in Shimosa, where they drop with a 40% drop rate. And finally, gallstones have a 12% drop rate at the Arakawa Field in Shimosa. Summer is all about sexy servants, and in that department, Jeanne Alter easily scores an S. But alas, for as perfect as she looks, her gameplay isn't nearly quite as flawless, especially when it comes to her stats, as Jeanne has some pretty awful numbers to work with. While she does have a ridiculously good attack stat for a 4-star, she has the absolute lowest HP, which is made even worse by her Berserker class designation. And her NP gain rate and star generating aren't particularly good either due to her Buster loaded deck. On the bright side though, Jalter is a servant that plays to her strength, and that strength is attacking. Her skills are built around making her as destructive as possible. Witch of the Fallen is a standard attack buff with a short cooldown that also allows it to be active for most of the battle. While 20% may not seem like much of a buff on paper, keep in mind that it pairs well with her passive Madness enhancement, and because most of her deck is comprised of Buster cards, her face card damage is significant. This skill also inflicts a small stackable burn on some enemies, which can help get in some extra damage every turn, especially on enemies who have defensive buffs. Jalter also has access to an additional damage steroid in her 3rd skill, which grants her an additional 20% buster damage as well as a 20% NP charge. Unfortunately, unlike her other damage buff, this one, while still being minor, only lasts for 1 turn. It also costs 1000 HP to activate the skill, which is not a minor cost at all when you consider Jeanne's small HP pool. It is, however, still excellent for setting up a strong Noble Phantasm thanks to the charge that it offers and the buff stacking multiplicatively with Witch of the Fallen. Finally, Jolter has one defensive option in Schwarzwald Falk. This skill grants her 1 hit of evasion every turn for 3 turns, and it also buffs her NP gain. The 30% buff to NP gain is decent, but nowhere near enough to make up for her deck and low base NP gain. Thankfully though, the dodge skill is excellent and can mitigate any potential one-hit KOs from crits or enemy NPs. The fact that it reactivates every turn can be a blessing or a curse depending on when you activate it, but if used properly like before an enemy Noble Phantasm, it can protect Jolter very well for 3 turns. However, the big weakness of this skill is that it won't protect you much from enemies who focus Jolter with multiple hits, so she still needs additional support if you hope to use her in longer battles. For skill priority, I recommend leveling Witch of the Fallen first, mostly for the lower cooldown, followed by the Buster buff for more damage, and then the Evade last as it is more situational. Jeanne Alter's Noble Phantasm is as straightforward as it gets, a single target Buster nuke that also inflicts a heavy burn. This is a very strong anti-boss weapon, especially considering how easy it is to get Jeanne Alter to NP5. Combined with her damage buffs and passive, this attack is capable of some huge damage. The burn also has good synergy with her attack buff, although burn as a mechanic isn't all that useful outside of some very specific gimmick fights. As you may have guessed, the name of the game for Berserker Jolter is Big Buster Damage. It's her bread and butter. And to be fair to her, she's very good at it. Even at NP1, her Noble Phantasm damage is up there with the other 4-star Berserkers like Ibaraki, and even surpasses Herc. So being able to obtain her at NP5 for free means that she's going to be the biggest damage dealing Berserker available to many players. Unless you're lucky enough to have an NP3 Kintoki or Hijikata lying around. And while her own damage buffs are quite low, both only being 20%, being a Buster Servant makes her very easy to support. So if you're just looking for big damage and making things go boom, then it's hard to beat out this cute Chuny. But unfortunately, that's about all she can do. Jolter isn't a very versatile servant. Unlike some of the other Berserkers in her rarity, she isn't capable of supporting the team with buffs, debuffing enemies, or lasting for long fights. And this is a major shortcoming because it makes her inflexible for any tough content. But her biggest weakness by far is her frailty. While Berserkers aren't exactly known for their survivability, Jolter brings the term glass cannon to a whole new level. With such pitifully low HP and a skill that drains 10% of her health to activate, she is prone to dying very easily and very quickly. Her evade does mitigate this downside a little bit, but as I mentioned earlier, if she's unlucky enough to be focused by an enemy, there isn't much else that she can do to survive, which means that any long battles are out of the question for her. Berserker Jolter is a one and done Berserker. She exists to come onto the battlefield, Noble Phantasm, and then leave. Due to her low survivability and lack of strong buffs, it's important to pair her with good supports who are either capable of keeping her alive or increasing her damage numbers. For survival options, I recommend Mosh, Media Lily, and Jeanne. Mosh's defense buffs and invincibility can help mitigate a ton of damage, especially in situations where the evade is not enough. Her attack buff also helps Jolter's overall damage. Media Lily and Jeanne are excellent healers, which does help with the negative effects of Jolter's third skill. Healing is something that you absolutely need if you plan on keeping Jolter alive for more than a few turns of fighting. And speaking of fighting, if you're looking for big damage numbers, make sure to pair Jolter with servants that provide large buster and attack buffs, like Liz, Nightingale, and Shakespeare. Liz's attack buff for females, coupled with her defense down, can give Jeanne Alter tremendous burst damage for 3 turns. Likewise, Nightingale's Buster buff is a super steroid for Jeanne that allows her Noble Phantasm to hit even harder. Shakespeare is a good alternative to Nightingale, and he also has the added benefit of being able to charge Jolter's NP gauge for an even faster Noble Phantasm, or potentially even a turn 1 Noble Phantasm if you have aerial drive and a mystic code that gives NP charge. Jeanne Alter's Bondcraft Essence is crystallization of accumulated time. It buffs the NP strength and buster card effectiveness of all allies by 10%. Typically, these types of party-wide buff CEs are better on supports. Instead, I recommend using buster and NP buffing CEs that have larger values and give more attack, like Limited Zero, Aerial Drive, Collide Ruby, or Black Grail. Just make sure you have a healer available if you're going to go the Black Grail route. If staying alive is becoming more of an issue for you, then you can go with a defensive craft essence like Volume and Hydradium for the extra survivability in tougher battles. In the future, I recommend looking out for Bittersweet, which drops with the next Valentine's event. It not only grants 2 hits of invincibility, but also buffs your NP damage, making it a good compromise for Jeanne's defensive and offensive needs. Overall, Jeanne Alter is a very straightforward and powerful Berserker. She is capable of putting out huge damage numbers with her Noble Phantasm. She can deal good damage even with her face cards thanks to her strong passive, low cooldown attack buff, and buster oriented deck. And as a free NP5 servant, she is going to easily outdamage most other Berserkers, even 5-star ones, unless you have them at NP3 or higher. And that makes her a very practical choice for most new players who need a boss killer. But of course, she does have huge issues with survivability due to her low HP pool and unreliable evade. Her own buffs are also a little lackluster, and her poor NP gain makes her ill-suited for any long fights or facing enemies with multiple HP bars, which unfortunately comprises most of the late game. So overall, Jeanne Alter Berserker gets a B+ from me. While she is extremely one-dimensional and has a lot of flaws, it's hard to fault her for them when she's just so good at what she does. She is a servant who's built to do a lot of damage, so while she lacks the flexibility of the top tier Berserkers, she does do her job better than nearly anyone else, and you can easily get a lot of good use out of her, especially if you're a newer player. And those are my thoughts on Jeanne Berserker. I do recommend everyone try and pick her up because she's absolutely worth it, and she also has a killer design. But let me know in the comments down below if you plan on rolling for her. Also check out my other Jeanne Archer video, which is up on the channel right now and linked on screen. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.